What do you do when the promise of a new life dies before it can even begin? When you journey 1,000 miles for a future that has already turned to dust? For Clara Mae Thompson, stepping off that train wasn't the beginning of a marriage, but the start of a war for something far more precious. No one could have known that this lone woman, with nothing but 2 suitcases and a worn-out letter, was about to change the fate of 7 lost children and a man who had long since forgotten what it meant to have a home. The train's whistle tore through the suffocating air of Dust Devil Gulch. It wasn't a town so much as a scar on the land, a place where heat, smoke, and a bone-deep weariness mingled between sun-bleached shacks and endless dirt. Clara clutched the handles of her luggage, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She had memorized the letter, the delicate script promising a modest home, a hard-working husband with calloused hands but a kind heart, the simple security of a roof and a warm meal. It promised a life, her last chance at one. But as the train hissed to a stop and the doors groaned open, the platform was empty. There was no man in a wide-brimmed hat, no horse tied to a post, no sign bearing her name. There was only a line of 7 children. Small, wiry, some barefoot, others in shoes that looked like they'd been passed down through generations of hardship. Their faces were smudged with grime, their hair a tangled mess, and their eyes were vast and empty, holding a type of sorrow Clara had never witnessed before. It wasn't fear or sadness, but a profound, hollowed-out abandonment. The oldest, a boy of about 13, held a swaddled infant in his arms. He took a single, deliberate step forward, drew a shaky breath, and met her gaze. The words he spoke would cleave Clara's life in two. "Are you Clara Mae Thompson?" She could barely form a reply. "Yes." Her voice was a fragile whisper. The boy looked down at the dusty planks of the platform, his lips pressing into a thin line. "He's gone," he said, the words falling like stones in the dead silence. "Snakebite. 3 days passed. We buried him ourselves." The world seemed to tilt and slide away from under Clara's feet. What are you saying?" she stammered, the promise in her pocket suddenly feeling like a cruel joke. He was dead. The man she was meant to marry, the life she was meant to have, was over. The boy's voice didn't tremble, it was flat, as if he'd rehearsed the tragedy in his mind until all emotion had been scarred away. "He wrote to you after he got sick," the boy continued, his gaze still fixed on the ground. "Said maybe you'd come anyway." The words were a physical blow. Clara pressed a hand to her chest, her breath catching in her throat. "No. Not after the journey, not after the letter, not after the hope she'd so carefully nurtured." She looked past the boy to the others. Twin girls, about 9 years old, clung to each other as if they were the only solid things in a crumbling world. A smaller girl of about 6 clutched a smooth, grey river stone to her chest like a sacred relic. Another boy, wiry and fierce, stood with his chin jutted out, a silent challenge to the world, though a telltale shimmer in his eyes betrayed the tears he refused to shed. And the littlest ones, a toddler barely steady on his feet, and the infant in the oldest boy's arms, slept on, blissfully unaware. Is there no one else?" Clara asked, her throat tight. The oldest boy, Caleb, finally looked up, and the emptiness in his eyes was absolute. "Just us." The train behind her let out another long, mournful whistle, a final call to escape, to get back on and leave this tragedy behind. But her feet were rooted to the spot. Her gaze was locked on those 7 broken faces, waiting for something they didn't even know how to ask for. "The house," she whispered. Caleb gestured with his head toward the desolate hills beyond the station. "It's over yonder. Ain't much, but it's all we got." Clara swallowed hard, her chest rising and falling as if she'd run a marathon. "Well," she managed, a fractured smile on her lips, a smile that felt more like a mask for her terror. "I suppose it doesn't need to be much." Without another word, Caleb shifted the baby to one arm and, with his free hand, took one of her suitcases. The other 6 fell into line behind him, a silent, solemn procession. Clara had no choice but to follow, each step taking her further from the life she had known and deeper into a future she could never have imagined. The path from the station felt longer than any road Clara had ever walked. The parched earth crunched under her boots, and with every step, the silence of the children pressed in on her. The wind was the only thing that spoke, whistling through scale-tall trees and kicking up little dust devils that clung to their clothes and their spirits. The children moved like a small, weary platoon, accustomed to marching forward without question, expecting no comfort. Clara learned their names in quiet murmurs. The oldest was Caleb. His twin sisters were Martha and Mary, identical but for the flicker of defiance in one's eyes and deep sorrow in the others. The fierce, untrusting boy was Silas. The little girl with the river stone was Hattie. The toddler was Finn, and the baby, so small and fragile, was named Rose. When they finally crested a hill, she saw it. To call it a house felt like an exaggeration. It was a leaning wooden cabin, its planks weathered to a silvery grey, its roof sagging in the middle. A single rusted hinge held the door askew, and the chimney was a crumbling stack of stones that looked one strong gust away from collapse. A broken fence encircled a patch of barren ground where a garden might once have tried to grow. Caleb pushed open the groaning door and stepped inside without a word. The others followed, one by one, in a ritual of quiet despair. Clara took a deep breath that tasted of dust and regret before crossing the threshold. What she found inside stole the air from her lungs. It was dark, the windows covered with grimy rags that let in only slivers of light. The air was thick with the smell of cold ashes, damp, and a profound sadness. A wobbly wooden table was flanked by mismatched benches. On a dusty shelf, 7 mismatched tin cups were lined up in a perfect, heartbreaking row. In a corner, a wood-burning stove stood cold and empty. Beside the hearth, a wooden crate served as a cradle, where Caleb gently placed baby Rose. Another corner held a pile of threadbare blankets that was, she realized with a jolt, their communal bed. Caleb set her suitcase on the floor with a heavy sigh. "That was Pa's chair," he said, nodding toward the only seat at the table with a back. Clara felt a lump form in her throat. "It's empty now," she said softly. Caleb just nodded. Suddenly, Hattie, the little girl who hadn't spoken a word, approached Clara, still clutching her smooth grey stone. Her large, dark eyes looked up, a mixture of suspicion and a desperate, flickering hope. "My name's Hattie," she whispered. "Mama said this stone would keep us safe." Clara knelt down, her heart aching. She gently touched the girl's cheek. "Well then, you've done a very good job of keeping everyone safe, haven't you?" Hattie gave a small, solemn nod. Rising, Clara walked to the corner that served as a kitchen. She opened the cupboard door and found nothing. No flour, no beans, no rice. Just a small bag of salt and an old jar containing something that looked more like dirt than sugar. She turned to the children. "What have you eaten these last few days?" Martha answered without looking up. "Silas caught a rabbit after Pa passed. But it's all gone now." Silas crossed his arms, his jaw tight, refusing to acknowledge the failure that he clearly felt so deeply. Clara closed her eyes for a moment, then reached into her travel bag. She pulled out the last of her own provisions, a small piece of dried meat and a packet of herbs she had saved for the journey. It wasn't for her anymore. She filled a pot with water from a bucket in the corner, coaxed a small fire to life in the stove, and began to cook. As the scent of the simple broth slowly filled the cabin, the oppressive atmosphere began to change. For the first time since she'd arrived, it didn't smell of sorrow. It smelled a little like home. The children sat around the table, silent. When she served the soup, it wasn't much, but it was everything. "Eat slowly," she said gently. They obeyed without a word. Clara didn't eat. She stood by the door, listening to the growl in her own stomach. That food wasn't for her. It was for them. It was a promise, a silent declaration that for this one night, at least, someone had chosen to stay. As dusk settled, painting the sky in deep shades of orange and bruised purple, a new kind of quiet fell over the cabin. After the meager meal, Caleb had taken the pot and plates outside to the well to wash them, and Silas had followed with the cups. It wasn't a command, it was the unspoken law of those who know that if they don't do it, no one will. Clara stayed inside with the girls, Finn, and baby Rose, who was now sleeping soundly in her wooden crate by the fire. She watched Martha and Mary as they began to lay out the thin, patched blankets on the floor. There was a deep sadness in seeing children so young performing such adult tasks with grim determination. "Where did your father sleep?" Clara asked softly. Mary pointed to a thin mattress in the corner, covered with a single tattered quilt. "There," she whispered. Clara nodded slowly, then looked at the pile of blankets at the other end of the cabin. "And all of you?" "We sleep here," Martha answered, gesturing to the floor. Hattie's small voice piped up. "When it gets real cold, we all huddle together." Clara felt something crack inside her chest. She knelt and smoothed Hattie's tangled hair, fighting back the tears that threatened to fall. Not now. Not in front of them. When Caleb and Silas returned, the last of the light had faded. Darkness fell quickly, and with it came the sounds of the night. Crickets chirped, and the wind rattled the dry branches outside, making the cabin's wooden frame creak and groan. Caleb slid a heavy wooden bar across the inside of the door. He then turned to Clara, his young face etched with the gravity of a man twice his age. "You should stay the night," he said, his tone flat. "You can leave on the morning train if you want." Clara looked at him, and she understood the desperately hidden beneath the stoic words. "I'm not leaving," she replied, her voice firmer than she felt. "Not tonight. Not tomorrow." Silas, who had been watching from the shadows, frowned. "Really?" he challenged, his arms crossed. "Really?" Clara affirmed with a sigh. "Now, we need to get this place ready for sleep." The twins began spreading the blankets. Hattie went to check on Rose, making sure she was covered. Finn, already half asleep, curled up on a thin cushion near the hearth. Clara took off her dusty boots and helped arrange the meager bedding. It wasn't comfortable, it wasn't nearly enough, but it was what they had. Tomorrow, she said, tucking a blanket around the smallest children, we'll see what we can do to make this place better. Caleb, sitting in his father's empty chair, stared into the fire. Why, he murmured, so quietly she almost didn't hear. Why are you staying? You know he's gone. Clara looked at him, and for a moment, she had no answer, because she didn't fully understand it herself. Maybe because when I saw your faces, I realized the reason I came here wasn't just for a husband. Silas let out a short, bitter scoff. There's nothing worth staying for here. Clara stood up, her hands on her hips, and looked at him with a startling intensity. You're wrong, she said, her voice clear and strong. There are 7 things here that are worth more than anything else in this world. Silas looked up, his expression shifting from defiance to confusion. 7, Clara said, a weary but genuine smile touching her lips. Yes? You? A profound silence filled the room. Even the wine seemed to hold its breath. Caleb looked down at his hands, swallowing hard. The twins hugged each other tightly. Hattie snuggled closer to the cradle, her little hand resting on the baby's blanket. Finn, who had been fighting sleep, finally succumbed, his small body relaxing into the warmth of the fire. Good night, Clara whispered, turning down the oil lamp. There were no replies, only the soft sound of 7 hearts beating in the dark, hearts that, for the first time in a long time, were not quite so afraid. The first rays of sunlight pierced through a crack in the boarded-up window, drawing a golden line across the dusty floor. Clara awoke slowly, her body aching from the hard floor, but with a strange sense of purpose settling in her soul. She sat up, taking in the sight of the 7 small forms huddled under the patched blankets. A few, like Silas, were already awake, sitting silently, watching the door as if expecting trouble. Caleb was already up, rocking the baby with a practiced, automatic motion that spoke of a burden carried for too long. Do you always wake so early? Clara asked, her voice raspy. Caleb nodded without looking at her. If we don't, there's no breakfast. His tone was simple, a statement of unavoidable fact. Silas stood and shoved open the door, letting a blast of cold morning air sweep through the cabin. And there won't be any today either, unless we find something, he added with a shrug. Clara got to her feet, brushing the dust from her dress. Then let's go see what can be found, she said, as much to herself as to them. She followed the boys outside, and the reality of their situation was even starker in the morning light. The land was parched, the fence was half fallen, and the old chicken co-op was nothing but a skeleton of weathered wood. In the distance, what might have once been a small orchard was now just a collection of cracked, lifeless stumps. She felt a wave of despair wash over her, but something inside, a strength she never knew she possessed, refused to let her sink. Did your father ever plant anything here? She asked Caleb. He nodded. Corn. Before Ma passed. Carrots and potatoes, too. But the well ran low, he said, shrugging. Everything dried up. Silas kicked a loose stone in frustration. The rains don't come like they used to. Clara looked around. And the chickens? Caleb wouldn't meet her eyes. We sold them. When Ma got sick. The last one we ate it. The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken grief and hunger. Clara looked back at the house, where she could see the twins, and Hattie peering out the dirty window, watching them. A deep, resolute breath filled her lungs. "This can't go on," she declared. Silas scowled. "And what are we supposed to do about it?" Clara met his gaze, her own eyes blazing with a determination that surprised even herself. "We are going to rebuild this place." Silas let out a bitter laugh. "With what? We got no money, no food, no nothing." "We have hands," Clara answered firmly. "And as long as these hands can move, we can do something." "It ain't that easy," Silas shot back, his voice thick with the cynicism of his short, hard life. "Nobody helps you out here. Nobody gives you nothing." Clara looked him straight in the eye. "Then we will do it ourselves." Silas shook his head, but he didn't argue. Deep down, they all knew there was no other choice. "Today," Clara announced, "we reclaim the land. We'll clear the weeds, we'll mend the fence, we'll see if that co-op can be salvaged. Caleb, you'll show me the well and what tools you have left, if any." Caleb hesitated for a second, then gave a firm nod. "All right." When they returned to the cabin, Clara began to organize. "Martha, Mary, help me clear out everything that isn't useful. Hattie, you can help by wiping the table and sweeping. Finn, you're on baby duty, can you do that?" Finn puffed out his chest and nodded as if he'd been given the most important job in the world. The children worked. Not because they trusted her completely, but because there was a force in her voice, an energy they hadn't felt in a very long time. As the hours passed, something began to shift. They pulled weeds until their hands were raw. They righted a section of the fence with fallen logs. They found a single rusty, but usable, shovel. They cleared the well and found it still held water, murky but present. Even Silas, after initially refusing, found himself on the roof, securing loose shingles. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't even close to enough. But as the sun began to set, and the homestead looked just a little less broken than it had that morning, they all felt it. For the first time in a very long time, they had done more than just survive. The next dawn was colder than the last. A biting wind snaked through the cracks of the cabin. Despite the previous day's work, the place still felt fragile, temporary. Clara was awake at the baby's first cry. Caleb was already there, rocking Rose in his arms while the twins tried to coax the stove to life. Silas was at his post by the corner, watching everyone with a perpetual scowl. Clara's whole body ached, a testament to a life of hardship she was only just beginning to understand. "Today," she said, stretching her sore muscles, "we go into town for supplies." Silas didn't look up. "With what? And for what?" "There's nothing there for us." "We're not going to beg," Clara said firmly. "We're going to work. We're going to offer what we can do." Mary, who had been silent until then, asked in a small voice, "What if they don't want us?" Clara knelt in front of her, taking her small hand. "Then we will learn to make do on our own. But first, we will try." The girls nodded, and Caleb, after a moment's silence, let out a sigh. "I'll go with you." Silas shot to his feet. "No, I'm gone. You stay here with the others. You're better with the baby anyway." Clara looked at him, surprised. She understood. He didn't trust the world to be kind to her, and he wouldn't leave the younger ones unprotected. "All right," she agreed. "You'll come with me." They prepared a small bag with the few things they could possibly trade, a hand-woven basket, some old tools, and a couple of blankets that were still in decent condition. Before they left, Caleb approached her. "Be careful," he said, his voice low. "Some of the folks in town, they ain't good." Clara nodded. "I know. But we don't have a choice." The walk to town was tense. With every step, Silas seemed to grow more rigid, as if preparing for a battle. The town was small but organized around a single main street. A general store, a blacksmith, a bakery that smelled faintly of stale bread. The stairs started immediately. A woman sweeping her porch scowled at them. A burly man with a thick mustache watched them from the blacksmith's doorway, his arms crossed. "Look at them," someone muttered, just loud enough to be heard. "The new ones." "The woman from the train." Silas clenched his fists, but Clara put a hand on his arm. "Don't." They went to the largest building, the general store. Behind the counter, a sour-faced, middle-aged man greeted them without looking up. "What do you want?" Clara took a breath. "I'm here to offer my services. I can clean, cook, mend, wash, whatever is needed. We just need some food." The man looked her up and down, then glanced at Silas and sneered. "No work here, lady. We don't take charity cases." "I'm not asking for charity," Clara said, her voice steady. "I'm offering my hands." The man paused, then shook his head. "No work for your kind here." "I told you," Silas muttered furiously under his breath. Clara didn't give up. They went from door to door. Some ignored her. Others looked at her with contempt. Just as they were about to turn back, defeated, a voice stopped them. "Are you the woman from the train?" An old woman with stark white hair pulled into a tight bun stood on the steps of the small village church. Clara nodded, exhausted. "Yes, that's me." The woman studied her for a long moment, her eyes sharp and intelligent. Then she gave a curt nod. "Follow me." Not understanding but having no other options, Clara and Silas followed her to a small house on the edge of town. "I need help," the woman said, opening her door. "My back won't allow it anymore. You clean my house and tend to my garden, and I can give you some food. Maybe a little more." Clara's eyes filled with tears, but she held them back. "Thank you. Thank you so much." The woman, Mrs. Gable, shook her head. "Don't thank me yet. The work is hard." Silas said nothing, but the tension in his small body finally began to ease. For the first time since they'd set foot in that town, someone hadn't looked at them like they were dirt. As they began to clear the overgrown garden, Clara felt a tiny, fragile seed of hope begin to sprout in her own heart. Clara and Silas worked for hours under the watchful eye of Mrs. Gable. She moved slowly with a cane, but her gaze missed nothing. As Clara scrubbed the wooden floors, the old woman finally spoke. "Why did you stay?" she asked, her voice raspy. Clara stopped, wringing out the rag in her hands. She took a deep breath. "Because I couldn't leave them. When I saw those children, I knew that my purpose here wasn't for a husband. It was for them." Mrs. Gable nodded, as if this confirmed something she already suspected. "You're a good woman," she said simply, before turning away. As night began to fall, the house was transformed. It wasn't perfect, but it was clean and alive again. Mrs. Gable gave them a small sack with bread, some rice, a few gnarled carrots, and a jar of honey. It was a treasure. As Clara was about to leave, Mrs. Gable stopped her. Here? She handed her a small, cloth-wrapped bundle. These are seeds. They won't save you today, but they might save you tomorrow. Clara took them, her eyes shining. I don't know how to thank you. Don't. Just promise me you won't give up, the old woman said, her expression turning serious. This place is harsher than it looks. There are men here who can't stand to see anyone else get a foothold. And they've already started watching you. A chill that had nothing to do with the evening air ran down Clara's spine. As they walked back, the silence between them was thick with unspoken thoughts. You think those townsfolk will do something? Silas finally asked. I don't know, Clara answered. But we'll be ready. When they crested the hill and saw the cabin, a warmth spread through her. The twins came running, followed by Hattie, who nearly tripped in her haste. They're back. Did you bring food? Finn cried, his eyes wide. As Clara opened the sack, the children crowded around, their faces alight with a joy she hadn't seen before. Caleb held the baby, a true smile finally reaching his eyes. Tonight, Clara said, looking at each of them, this is a home again. But as the makeshift family celebrated, Caleb, who was standing by the door, stiffened. There's someone out there, he said, his voice tense. Far across the valley, on an opposing ridge, the silhouette of a man on horseback was stark against the dying sun. He wasn't moving closer. He was just watching. Who is that? Silas demanded, his small fists clenched. I don't know, Clara whispered, feeling a cold dread creep over her. The man slowly turned his horse and vanished into the trees. For a long moment, no one spoke. The wind soughed through the dry grass. Then Caleb, his face a hard mask, said in a low, certain voice, they're watching us. And suddenly, Clara understood. The seeds, the bread, the honey, they were just the beginning. The real fight wasn't against hunger. It was against something far more dangerous. The night fell with a heavy, ominous weight. A raw, cold wind howled down from the hills, making the old cabin creak and groan. Clara couldn't get the image of the rider out of her mind. She, Caleb, and Silas spent hours reinforcing the door with the few planks they had and some bent nails. They barricaded the windows with crates and bits of wood. The younger children sensed the shift. The twins were quiet, Hattie clutched her stone and didn't leave the baby's side, and Finn kept asking, are they coming? Are they coming to take us away? Clara held him tight, repeating the same words over and over. No one is taking anyone anywhere. But she wasn't sure she believed it herself. Just after midnight, a loud crack shattered the silence. Someone was kicking at the fence. Two of them, Caleb whispered, peering through a slit in the door. Silas grabbed the largest stick he could find, his face rigid with fury. Clara's heart hammered against her ribs. She moved to the door, signaling for the children to stay back and be silent. A rough, mocking voice called out from the darkness. We know you're in there, lady. This ain't your place. You got no right. Go on back where you came from. This land was promised, another voice snarled. And we ain't taking on the burden of you and them brats. Clara swallowed hard, then did the last thing they expected. She unbarred the door and opened it. The two men, tall, grimy, and surprised, fell silent for a second. One had a whip coiled at his belt, the other a long knife. "Is there a problem?" Clara asked, her voice shaking but her gaze unwavering. "More of a problem than you know," the man with the knife answered. "This land has depths. Your intended owed us, and now you are squatting on what's ours." "We are not leaving," Clara said, her voice finding its strength. The other man stepped forward. "We'll say this once. You have 3 days. 3. You get out or we drag you out, with all them crying children behind you." Silas lunged forward, gripping his stick so tightly his knuckles were white. "You just try it," he roared. The man laughed. "Look at the little rat, thinking he's a lion." Clara put an arm out, blocking Silas. "No," she said, her voice sharp as steel. "We are not afraid of you." The men exchanged a look. One spat on the ground. "Choose wisely, woman." 3 days. They turned, gave the broken fence one last kick for good measure, and disappeared into the night. Clara slammed the door, her body finally trembling with a mixture of fear and rage. "Cowards!" Silas screamed, throwing his stick to the floor. "They want to take everything." Clara knelt and grabbed his shoulders, forcing him to look at her. "Listen to me, Silas. They do not get to decide what happens to us. They don't decide if we stay or if we go." Silas was breathing hard, his eyes filled with tears of fury. "And if they come back?" Clara gritted her teeth. "Then that is when we truly begin to fight." The room was silent. The children looked at her, their fear mingled with something new, something that looked dangerously like hope. The next dawn broke heavy and grey, the sky threatening a storm that was more than just weather. Clara hadn't slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the sneering faces of the two men. As she heated some water, Caleb sat beside her, the weight of the world on his young shoulders. "What are we going to do now?" he asked. Clara looked at him, her face a mask of resolve. "We can't just wait for them. I'm going back to town." "Alone?" Caleb asked, alarmed. "No," she said, looking him in the eye. "You are coming with me. Silas stays here. Barricade the door and don't open it for anyone." Silas nodded, his expression as serious as any general's. The walk to town felt different. The hostile stares were now laced with something more sinister, the whispers more venomous. "There she is," someone muttered. "Thinks she can hold that land. Won't last the week," another added. But not everyone looked at them with hate. From the doorway of her small house, Mrs. Gable watched them approach, her face a mixture of hardness and worry. "I need your help," Clara said, foregoing any pleasantries. "I know," Mrs. Gable replied, ushering them inside and barring her own door. "I heard what happened last night. It was bound to." "Who are they?" Caleb demanded. The old woman sighed. "The Graves brothers. Jade and Bart. They pretend they own half the county by preying on folks with nothing. They loaned your father money at rates no decent man would ask. And now they think they have the right to take everything," Clara finished. Mrs. Gable nodded grimly. "And you are not the first they've tried to run off." "What happened to the others?" Clara asked, a chill running down her spine. Mrs. Gable looked away. "Some left. Others just disappeared." I am not leaving, Clara stated. Mrs. Gable studied her. Then listen close. There's someone who might help you. He doesn't live in town, but he comes to the blacksmith's shop every week or so. His name is Warren. Who's Warren? Caleb asked. The old woman's voice was steady. Warren Walker. Your father's brother. The room fell silent. What? Clara whispered, her hand flying to her chest. My father, he never spoke of a brother, Caleb said, stunned. Mrs. Gable nodded sadly. They had a falling out years ago. Over something no one even remembers now. But Warren, he's not like these other men. He's different. Where can we find him? He's due today or tomorrow. He always stops at the forge before he leaves. A new fire of determination lit inside Clara. We'll wait for him. Mrs. Gable pressed a small bag of flour and beans into Caleb's hands. Don't go back by the road. Take the forest path. It's longer but it's safer. As they left, Caleb was quiet, his mind reeling. Do you think this Warren will help us? I don't know, Clara said, squeezing his shoulder. But we can't give up. As they made their way toward the blacksmith's shop, two shadows detached themselves from the trees on a distant hill. The Graves brothers were watching. And they were waiting too. Clara and Caleb waited for nearly 2 hours, the rhythmic clang of the blacksmith's hammer marking the slow, agonizing passage of time. Just as the sun began its descent, a figure on horseback appeared on the dusty road. He rode with a straight-backed confidence, his face as hard and unforgiving as the land itself. He wore a worn leather coat and a dark hat that shadowed his eyes. The blacksmith looked up and gave a nod of respect. That's him, Caleb whispered, swallowing hard. The man dismounted, tied his horse to a post and turned. His eyes, a piercing grey, swept over them. He focused on Caleb, and his hard expression flickered with a strange mix of shock and recognition. Clara stepped forward. Are you Warren Walker? He narrowed his eyes. Who's asking? My name is Clara Mae Thompson, she said, taking a breath. Your brother, Richard, he wrote to me. I came here to marry him. Warren's jaw tightened. For a moment he looked like he was carved from stone, but then a crack appeared in his composure. Richard, he repeated, the name a ghost on his lips. Where is he? Clara's voice was low. He passed. A snake bite a few weeks ago. Warren closed his eyes, his fists clenching so hard his knuckles turned white. Damned fool, he muttered, more to himself than to them. When he opened his eyes again, they were fixed on Caleb. And you are? Caleb lifted his chin, meeting the man's gaze though his legs were trembling. I'm Caleb. His son. Warren flinched as if struck. He took a half step back, the weight of the revelation hitting him full in the chest. His gaze softened, filled with an old, deep pain. My God, he breathed, running a hand through his hair. You have his eyes. Exactly. We're alone, Clara said, her voice trembling. He's gone, and there are 7 children, and now men are trying to run us off the land, and I can't leave them. Warren's jaw was a hard line. He turned to the blacksmith. Give us a minute. The smith nodded and moved away. Warren faced them, his arms crossed. Listen to me, he said, his voice a low rumble. I don't know what Richard promised you, but this place can be hell. "We know that," Caleb said, a new strength in his voice. Warren nodded, a flicker of pride in his eyes. "The Graves brothers came last night. They gave us 3 days to leave." Warren's face darkened. "That doesn't surprise me. Those vultures have been waiting for Richard to fail for years. They figured he couldn't pay them, and now they can just take it all." "We are not leaving," Clara said. For the first time, Warren looked at her, truly looked at her, and the hardness in his eyes wavered. "No," he said, a strange certainty in his tone. "You are not." He walked to his horse, opened a leather saddlebag, and pulled out a cloth-wrapped bundle. He set it on a nearby barrel and, with slightly trembling hands, unwrapped it. Inside was an old, battered journal. He flipped through the worn pages until he reached the last one. There, in a shaky but clear hand, was an entry. "If I am gone before she arrives, know that all I have, little though it is, belongs to her and to my children. This land, this house, it isn't much, but it's who we are." Warren looked up. "He sent this to me weeks ago. He knew something might happen. Asked me to hold on to it." Clara brought a hand to her mouth, feeling tears well in her eyes. Caleb stared, his body trembling. "This," Warren said, closing the journal, "this gives you the right to stay. It gives you the right to fight. Because even if the law out here is twisted, a man's last will is something even the Graves brothers can't erase." A fire ignited in Clara's chest. "Then we will fight." Warren looked at her, a slow, grim smile touching his lips. "All right, lady. We'll fight." As the sun dipped below the horizon, for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, Clara and Caleb were no longer alone. The walk back to the cabin was different. It wasn't just Caleb walking taller or Clara clutching the journal to her chest like a shield. It was Warren walking beside them. Silent, resolute, a bulwark against the world. As they crested the final hill, the cabin came into view, but something was terribly wrong. The newly mended fence was smashed. The dilapidated chicken co-op had been kicked in. The door to the house hung open. "No!" Caleb shouted, starting to run. "Wait!" Warren grabbed his arm, his grip like iron. "Don't run into a trap." Clara's blood ran cold. "The children." Warren turned to her, placing a firm hand on her shoulder. The touch was grounding, a transfer of strength. "Look at me," he said, his voice low and commanding. "Whatever happens, you stay behind me. Understood?" Clara swallowed, her eyes locking with his, and for the first time, she allowed herself to share the crushing weight. "Understood," she whispered. Warren pulled an old but well-cared-for shotgun from his horse's saddle scabbard. "Let's go." They moved forward slowly. From behind the cabin, a rustle. "Caleb," a voice whispered. Silas emerged from the bushes, covered in dust, clutching his stick. He ran to them, breathless. They left. They came and kicked everything, but they didn't get inside. "The others?" Clara gasped, her heart in her throat. "Inside? We barricaded ourselves, like you said." They rushed to the cabin. Inside, the twins, Hattie, Finn, and the baby were huddled in a corner, terrified but unharmed. Clara fell to her knees and gathered them into an embrace so tight she thought she might never let go. When she looked up, her tear-filled eyes met Warren's. His expression was one she'd never seen before, not of a hard man, but of someone remembering what it felt like to care. How many? He asked Silas. 3, Silas spat. They smashed what they could, but they couldn't get in. Warren surveyed the damage, his eyes cold and analytical. But when his gaze passed over Clara and the children, it softened. This isn't a threat anymore, he said, turning to her. This is a war. Clara stood, meeting his intense gaze. Then we will fight it. He held her stare, and for a heartbeat, the world fell away. They weren't a rough stranger and a desperate woman. They were two broken halves of a whole they didn't know existed. He broke the gaze first, clearing his throat. We fortify this place. They won't be expecting us to be ready tonight. The children, along with Caleb and Silas, sprang into action, gathering wood, stones, anything they could find. As Warren nailed a heavy plank across the door, Clara came to his side, holding the nails for him. For a brief second, their fingers touched. Neither of them moved. Thank you, she whispered. Warren didn't reply, just gave a curt nod, but she saw the muscle in his jaw tense, saw his hand tremble for just an instant. And she smiled. A real smile. We're not alone, she thought. And in that moment they both knew. Something had begun between them, something unexpected, powerful, and unstoppable. The night fell like a heavy shroud. The wind howled, rattling the newly reinforced door and windows. The tension inside was a living thing. The children were huddled by the fire, their small faces pale in the flickering light. Warren had checked every corner, every nail, every plank. Caleb and Silas stood with him, no longer boys, but soldiers in a war they hadn't chosen. I'll take the first watch, Warren said, his arms crossed. I'll watch with you, Clara answered without hesitation. He looked at her, and behind his hard expression, something flickered. You're tougher than you look, he murmured. She held his gaze. And you're not as hard as you pretend to be. The firelight danced on their faces. The silence between them was charged, filled with words neither dared to speak. He was the first to look away, turning to the window. I'll watch from here. She went and stood beside him. Will they come? She asked softly. They'll come, he said, his jaw tight. They're not used to being told no. Then, almost to himself, he spoke, his voice cracking just slightly. I didn't think I could care about anything this much again. Clara looked at him. Care about what? He took a deep breath, his fists clenched. You, he said, the word raw and painful. You, or these kids, or this damned place. Something broke open inside her. Or perhaps, something that had always been broken began to heal. She reached out and slowly, as if afraid she might scare him away, she brushed a stray lock of hair from his face. His hand came up to cover hers, his skin rough against hers. I don't know if this is crazy, he whispered, his voice barely audible. I don't care, she breathed. He leaned in, and their foreheads touched. For the first time, the strong, unbreakable man let his defenses fall. They stood like that for a long moment, the world outside ceasing to exist, until a sharp crack from the darkness yanked them back to reality. Did you hear that? Caleb hissed, rushing over. Warren straightened, grabbing the shotgun. He peered through a crack in the wall. Yes, he said, his voice grim. They're here. A branch snapped. A hoarse whinnied in the distance. Muffled voices broke the stillness of the night. The threat was no longer a shadow, it was at their door. Warren cocked the shotgun, his grey eyes like steel. Caleb, Silas, get everyone to the back room. Don't come out no matter what you hear. What about you? Caleb asked, his eyes wide. Warren looked at Clara, and in front of everyone, he put a hand on the small of her back. A silent pact. We hold the line here. A voice boomed from outside. We know you are in there, Walker. Come on out and no one gets hurt. Lies, Silas spat. Clara took a deep breath. Her chest rose and fell rapidly, but as she looked at Warren, a strange confidence calmed her fear. A thunderous crash shook the door. Bam! 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 The wood shuddered but held. Last chance, the voice yelled. You got no right to that land. Then, in the midst of the chaos, Warren turned to her. He cupped her face in his hands, his touch urgent and desperate, and he kissed her. It was a kiss that spoke of everything they couldn't say. A kiss that tasted of gunpowder and earth and a desperate, beautiful hope. When they parted, their eyes were shining. If we don't make it through this, he rasped, I want you to know you changed everything for me. She pressed her hand to his heart. And you for me, she whispered. Whatever happens, I am not alone anymore. Bam! The door splintered. Warren raised the shotgun. Get off this land, he roared. Laughter from outside. You think that old gun's gonna stop us? Another crash, and the hinge groaned, beginning to give way. Suddenly, the door burst open. A dark figure lunged through the threshold. Warren fired. The blast was deafening. The man screamed, clutching a leg shattered by the blast. You son of a! Another man roared, charging in. Silas, acting on pure instinct, swung his heavy stick with all his might, connecting with the man's knee. The man crumpled, his weapon clattering to the floor. The third intruder, seeing his companions fall, froze. It ain't worth it, he yelled, scrambling back. He leaped onto his horse and fled into the night, leaving his two partners groaning on the ground. When the silence returned, it was broken only by the sound of ragged breathing and the soft sobs of Hattie running into Clara's arms. Warren lowered the gun, looking at the wounded men with pure contempt. Get up! And you tell everyone in this valley that this family doesn't break. He turned to Clara, his expression softening. He framed her face with his hands, resting his forehead against hers. We're all right, he whispered. We're all right. Clara closed her eyes. Yes, she breathed. And now I know it was all worth it. The dawn that followed was quiet. But it was a new kind of quiet, not of fear, but of awe. The news spread through the valley like wildfire, the woman from the train, and that hermit Warren Walker had stood up to the Graves brothers. And they had won. From the window, Warren watched the road to the village. Behind him, Clara was making bread with the last of the flour. The twins helped, while Hattie and Finn sorted the precious seeds Mrs. Gable had given them. Caleb and Silas were outside, mending the fence, their faces serious and proud. It was the rhythm of a family. Clara turned, and her eyes found Warren's. It was automatic now. Since the kiss, since the fight, it felt as if their souls were intertwined. He turned from the window, and the hardness melted from his face, leaving only her. Last night, he began, his voice low, I thought you might have run. She set down her work and walked toward him. And why would I have done that, she whispered. He looked away for a second, searching for the words. Because this place ain't fair. Because you don't deserve to have to fight and suffer like this. She reached up and touched his face, making him look at her. Maybe I don't, she said softly. But you don't deserve to be here alone either. His breath caught. He closed his eyes, as if her words were a balm on an old wound. When I saw you get off that train, he murmured, his voice thick with emotion, I never thought you were coming to save us all. Clara leaned closer until their foreheads touched. And I never knew that the home I was searching for was you. He pulled her to him, and their lips met again. Not with the urgency of fear, but with the quiet certainty of two souls who had finally found their harbor. Mama? Finn's small voice made them spring apart. There's a man on the road, he said, pointing. He's coming this way. Warren tensed, grabbing the shotgun, but one look through the crack in the door made him lower it slowly. It wasn't the Graves brothers. It was the town sheriff, and behind him were two other men, store owner and the pastor. The sheriff dismounted, his face serious but not hostile. We heard what happened, he said simply. And? Warren challenged, his arms crossed. The sheriff took a deep breath. And we are not going to let the Graves brothers run this valley anymore. We are here to tell you that if you are staying, the town is ready to help. Clara blinked in disbelief. Help us? The store owner's wife, who had followed, nodded, her eyes misty. We didn't see, she said, her voice trembling. Or we didn't want to see. But you reminded us what this place could be. Warren was silent for a moment. Then he looked at Clara, and she looked back at him, and in that shared glance, they both knew. Something had finally, truly changed. They hadn't just defended a house. They had started to build a community. The days that followed felt like they belonged to another life. A life where fear wasn't the master of every sunrise. The town came first hesitantly, then with purpose. The blacksmith brought nails and wood. The baker brought sacks of flour. Neighbors brought chickens to fill the empty co-op. The children, who had only known how to hide, now ran laughing through a yard that was slowly coming back to life. Caleb and Silas worked alongside Warren, their boyish faces set with a man's pride as they raised a new roof. And between it all were Clara and Warren. A shared look over a sawhorse, a fleeting touch of hands when passing a tool, a hidden smile. They were building more than a house. They were building a life. One afternoon, as Clara knelt in the new garden planting carrots with Hattie, she felt a shadow fall over her. It was Warren. He just stood there, watching her, his hat in his hands. I spent my whole life believing I didn't have a place, he said, his voice rough with emotion. That I didn't deserve one. Clara rose slowly. And then you came, he continued, stepping closer. You and these children. And you taught me what home means. I didn't know I was looking for this place until I found you, she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. He took her dirt-stained hand in his. I don't know if this is what you imagined when you got off that train, he said, his voice breaking slightly. But if you'll have me, we could build this life together. She didn't answer with words. She threw her arms around his neck, burying her face in his chest. He held her tight, and in the scent of earth and wood and hope, she knew she would never be alone again. He pulled back, reaching into his pocket and producing a small carved wooden box. "It's not gold," he said, opening it to reveal a simple silver ring. "It was my mother's. It's all I have." He looked into her eyes, his own full of a vulnerable, terrifying hope. "Clara Mae Thompson. Marry me. Marry me, and let's finish building this family. This life." Tears streamed down her face as she nodded. "Yes," she breathed. "Yes, Warren. Yes." Behind them, unnoticed, the children watched, their faces breaking into wide, joyous smiles. "They're getting married," Caleb yelled, and as laughter and cheers filled the air, the setting sun bathed the entire homestead in a warm, golden light, as if the very heavens were blessing their new beginning. The ceremony was held under an old oak tree, in front of the small orchard they had all planted together. There was no fancy church, no expensive dress, but there was more love than any cathedral could hold. Clara, in her simple dress adorned with wild flowers woven by the twins, walked toward Warren. When he saw her, the past, the pain, the loss, it all vanished. There was only her. The pastor smiled. "Sometimes," he said, his voice warm, "a life doesn't take you where you wanted to go, but exactly where you were needed most." He looked at Warren. "Do you take this woman to be your wife, the heart of this family you have built from love and struggle?" Warren's voice was steadier than it had ever been. "I do. I will love and protect her for all of my days." He then turned to Clara. "And do you take this man to be your husband, your shelter, and your strength?" She squeezed his hand, her voice thick with emotion. "I do. I will love him as long as I have breath." And there, surrounded by 7 children who were no longer orphans, and neighbors who were no longer strangers, they sealed their promise. A promise that even when life had left them broken, together, they were unbreakable. 5 years later, the old journal still sat on the mantel of the new, sturdy house. On the final page, in Clara's hand, a new entry was written. "A family is not always born of blood. Sometimes it is forged in fire, built by choice, and sealed by love. Where there was once fear, there is now a home." If this story has touched your heart, and if you believe that home isn't just a place you find, but something you build, then please subscribe to this channel. We believe in the power of love, family, and hope. And if you are ready for another story that will move you just as deeply, click on the video you see on your screen right now. I promise you won't be disappointed. End of script.